So imagine a strictly enforced medieval legal framework.
Oh,
The kind of system that, dictates the exact physical postures of your daily prayers.
right. Or the precise mathematical formulas for your inheritance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the specific terms you're, allowed to use in a business contract.
Very granular stuff.
Very. And usually when we think of a legal structure born in the 8th century, the phrases that come to mind are, I don't know, rigid or punitive.
Yeah, authoritarian usually.
Right, authoritarian. But what if I told you that the ultimate kind of animating, driving force behind one of the most widespread legal systems in human history is, it's community kindness.
It sounds like a total contradiction, doesn't it?
It really does. It's a massive paradox. And that is exactly what we're unpacking for you today in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We are exploring the Maliki tradition. And the deeper you look into this framework, the more you realize it's essentially, faith expressed through community kindness.
Which completely flips the script on how we assume ancient religious law operates.
Totally. So the question for you, the listener, as we navigate this today is how? How does a highly structured, ancient legal framework actually transform into a living, breathing system of community care?
It's a brilliant paradox to start with, honestly.
Yeah.
But to understand how that transformation happens, we really need to draw some very hard boundaries around what we're actually analyzing here.
Right, because it's easy to get lost.
Well, incredibly easy. Because from the outside looking in, the terminology can be just, incredibly confusing.
Yeah.
When people hear the phrase the Maliki tradition, there's a tendency to categorize it alongside major global religions.
Right, it's its own thing entirely.
Exactly. Or they assume it's a distinct breakaway sect with a different theology, or a different prophet, or a separate scripture.
Which it is not.
No, we need to be explicitly clear right out of the gate here. What's fascinating here is that it is none of those things. The Maliki tradition is a madhab.
A madhab.
Yes. It is one of the 4 major Sunni schools of Islamic jurisprudence. It exists entirely and, comfortably within the mainstream framework of Sunni Islam.
Okay, let's unpack this. So we're not talking about a theological schism here at all.
Not at all.
To put it in terms of, modern civics, if Sunni Islam is the constitution of a country.
Right, the absolute foundational document.
Yeah, the document that establishes the borders of the state, the core values, the basic rights. Then the 4 major legal schools, the madhabs, are 4 different Supreme Court philosophies interpreting that exact same constitution.
That is a phenomenal analogy, yeah.
They aren't debating the Constitution itself. They all share the same founding text. They revere the same founders.
Right.
What they have developed are entirely different methodologies and, legal reasoning styles for how to apply those foundational laws to new situations on the ground.
That gets right to the heart of the matter. The theology is the constitutional boundary. The Maliki jurist and the Hanafi jurist both agree on the absolute oneness of God, the finality of prophecy, the reality of the last day. That is completely unquestioned.
So where does the split happen then?
The divergence is strictly in the realm of fiqh.
Fiqh, meaning jurisprudence.
Exactly. Jurisprudence. It's the granular daily legal application. Just as one Supreme Court justice might be a strict textual originalist.
While another believes in a living, adaptable document.
Precisely. These early Islamic scholars had to prioritize different intellectual tools. But your analogy actually points us toward the central tension that birthed these schools in the first place.
Which is what?
Well, if everyone is looking at the same divine text, how do you faithfully derive laws for a rapidly expanding empire while ensuring you aren't just imposing your own subjective bias onto the text?
And that is exactly where I get tripped up, because I think the modern assumption is that a text is just a text.
Right. It says what it says.
Exactly. If they're all reading the exact same Quran and they're all looking at the life of the exact same prophet, how do they end up with 4 distinct, geographically separated schools of law?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Why doesn't the text just spit out one universal answer for every single problem?
Because human language, by its very nature, is ambiguous. And human societies are infinitely complex.
Fair point.
A text might give you a broad principle, right? Like establish justice or do not consume each other's wealth unjustly.
Okay.
But what does unjustly actually mean when a merchant in an 8th century bazaar invents a brand new type of credit default swap?
Right. The text doesn't explicitly mention that specific financial instrument.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And furthermore, you have to remember the Islamic empire expanded with breathtaking speed. Within roughly a century, You had Muslim communities stretching from the borders of China and Central Asia
Wow.
all the way across North Africa to the Iberian Peninsula.
That is a massive amount of cultural diversity.
Unbelievable diversity.
Yeah.
So a judge sitting in the cosmopolitan, culturally diverse, newly conquered city of Kufa in Iraq.
Yeah.
They're facing totally different societal norms and completely different economic realities than a judge sitting in the agricultural heartland of Egypt.
So the text is just silent on many of these localized realities.
Exactly.
So the divergence isn't a disagreement over the sacredness of the text.
No, not at all.
It's a disagreement over the methodology of filling in the blanks. Like, when the text is silent, what do you do?
Precisely. Do you lean heavily into systematic rational analogy?
Okay.
Do you scour the empire for every single isolated, authenticated written report of what the prophet might have said and just rely strictly on that?
Right.
Or do you look at the living, inherited behavior of the community?
And that third option.
Yes, that methodological choice to elevate the living community, that leads us directly into the 8th century.
To the desert sands of Medina.
Exactly. And to the birth of the Maliki school.
Okay, so Medina is the anchor point for everything we are going to discuss today.
Absolutely.
We're talking about Imam Malik ibn Anas, who lives roughly from 715 to 795 CE. He's this titan of early Islamic scholarship.
A towering figure.
And he compiles this monumental text called the Al-Muwatta. But what makes Imam Malik and his resulting school so utterly distinct isn't just that he wrote a book.
No, lots of scholars wrote books.
Right. It's the epistemology behind it. Here's where it gets really interesting. It is his reliance on a concept called Amal al-Medina,
Yes.
which translates to the practice of the people of Medina.
This is the defining intellectual signature of the Maliki tradition.
Yeah.
To understand the gravity of Amal, you really have to understand what Medina represented in the 8th century.
Paint that picture for us.
It wasn't just a prominent city. It was the crucible of the Islamic faith. It was the city where the Prophet Muhammad established the very first sovereign Muslim society.
Right.
When he passed away, the vast majority of his closest companions, people who literally watched him pray, trade, resolve disputes, govern...
They didn't just leave.
No. They didn't all scatter to the winds. Thousands of them remained right there in Medina.
Wow.
They raised their families there. They governed the markets there. They established the societal norms.
Okay, so they are the living legacy.
Exactly. So Imam Malik looked at this reality and concluded something profound. He believed that the consistent, everyday, multi-generational habits of the residents of Medina were not just arbitrary cultural customs.
Right. It's not just, oh, this is how we like to do things here.
No, he saw it as a direct, living, physically embodied reflection of the Prophet's normative way.
I find this entirely fascinating from a sociological perspective, because it shifts the locus of religious authority from the ivory tower down to the street level.
It really democratizes it in a way.
Yeah. It makes me think of the difference between abstract knowledge and embodied knowledge. Like, think about trying to learn a complex family recipe.
Okay, I love this analogy.
If you try to bake a delicate pastry from a written recipe card, which in this historical context would be like a jurist relying on a single isolated hadith.
Exactly, a single text.
You're entirely dependent on your own interpretation of those words. The recipe card might say, add a pinch of salt, but what is a pinch?
Right, how big are your fingers?
Exactly. Or it might forget to mention that the butter needs to be cold because the person who wrote the card just assumed you knew that.
Because to them, it's obvious.
But if you learn to bake that pastry by standing in the kitchen and watching your grandmother and your aunts and your neighbors make it together every single Sunday for 20 years.
That is living practice.
That is amal. The muscle memory of the community is practically foolproof compared to the isolated text.
That is a phenomenal way to illustrate the epistemology of amal. An isolated written report, a single hadith, is passed down through a chain of individual narrators, right? A told B, who told C.
Which leaves a lot of room for error.
Exactly. It's subject to human memory lapses, linguistic shifts, or just a total lack of context.
Like the butter needing to be cold.
Right. The narrator might have heard the prophet say something, but didn't realize he was stating an exception to a rule, not the rule itself.
Oh, that's a huge distinction.
Huge. But the living practice of a city. Imam Malik is looking at thousands of pious people acting in unison.
Right.
If thousands of people in the prophet's own city 3 generations later are conducting a specific type of agricultural contract in the exact same way,
Yeah.
Imam Malik argues it is mathematically and sociologically impossible that they all collectively conspired to invent an innovation and abandon the Prophet's practice.
They wouldn't just all wake up one day and agree to do it wrong.
Exactly. The collective behavior becomes an immensely powerful legal proof. In the Maliki framework, the living consensus of Medina can actually override an isolated, seemingly contradictory written report.
Wait, really? The practice can override the written text?
If it's a solitary report that contradicts the massive established communal practice of Medina, yes, the Malikis will favor the practice.
Which is such a profound statement about human nature and trust. It places an immense amount of dignity on the ordinary daily life of a community.
It truly does.
It says that the ultimate truth isn't just held by the guy locked in a library analyzing sentence structure.
Right.
The truth is held by the merchants in the market, the mothers in the home, the farmers in the field, simply by virtue of them living out their inherited tradition.
It's a very grounded worldview.
It is, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
We'll go for it.
Because I see the beauty in trusting the communal muscle memory, but human communities are deeply flawed.
Of course.
Sometimes a community doesn't inherit a pure prophetic tradition. Sometimes they just normalize a really bad habit over 50 years.
Yes, groupthink is real.
Right. So how does a legal school, based on the way we've always done things in this one specific city, survive contact with reality? It sounds incredibly rigid.
It does sound that way initially.
Like if you take an 8th century Medina framework and try to apply it to a 12th century trading hub in West Africa, shouldn't it just completely shatter?
That is exactly the critique that scholars from more text-centric or heavily rationalist schools would level at the early Malikis.
Really? So they saw that flaw too?
Oh, absolutely. They argued that Amal was too localized, too bound to the specific socioeconomic conditions of the Arabian Peninsula.
So how did the Malikis respond?
Well, this brings us to the great paradox of the Maliki tradition. It is simultaneously the most deeply historically rooted school, yet historically it is proven to be perhaps the most dynamically adaptable.
Okay, I need you to explain that.
The mechanism for that adaptability is a specific set of jurisprudential tools that take the ethos of Medina and allow it to scale globally.
Right, because they aren't just copy-pasting Medinan customs.
No, not at all.
They're applying Medinan reasoning. And while they use standard tools like Qiyas, which is analogy, and Ima, which is consensus,
Right.
the real powerhouse concept here, the engine of their adaptability, is this concept called maslaha or istisla,
Yes.
which means consideration of public benefit or public welfare.
Exactly. When a Maliki jurist encounters a completely unprecedented situation, something that texts are silent on, and something there is no established Medinan practice for, they don't just throw their hands up.
What do?
They engage in maslah.
Yeah.
They ask, what ruling will secure the greatest benefit for the community and repel the greatest harm?
Okay, stop right there.
Yeah.
Public benefit. That sounds like the mother of all legal loopholes.
Laughs. Yeah, I can see why you'd say that.
Let's be real about how human power structures work. If a judge who is appointed by a wealthy ruler can just invoke public welfare to derive a new law whenever the text is silent,
Right.
doesn't that just open the floodgates to corruption? Like, a corrupt judge could say, well, it benefits the public welfare if we tax the peasants an extra 50% to build the king a new palace, because a strong king means a stable society.
A classic slippery slope.
Exactly. Isn't Maslaw just a blank check to make up rules to suit whatever the ruling class or the current societal whim demands?
That is a phenomenal pushback. And it is exactly the fear that drove the more literalist schools to reject maslah entirely.
They just threw the whole concept out.
Many did, yes.
Yeah.
They viewed it as a backdoor to subjective human legislation bypassing divine law. But Maslaki jurisprudence is acutely aware of that danger.
So they put up guardrails.
Massive guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
Maslah is absolutely not a blank check. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is not utilitarianism where you just calculate whatever brings the most immediate pleasure to the most people.
Okay.
It is a highly disciplined, rigorously bounded process.
So what are the boundaries? How do they actually stop the corrupt judge from abusing it?
First and foremost, maslah can never, under any circumstances, contradict a clear, explicit text of the Quran or a definitively established teaching of the Prophet.
So the text still reigns supreme if it speaks clearly.
Absolutely. If the text provides a clear prohibition, you cannot invoke public benefit to override it. It is only deployed in areas of legal silence or profound ambiguity.
Got it. What's the second boundary?
Secondly, the benefit being considered cannot be arbitrary. It must objectively align with what jurists call the maqasid al-sharia.
The maqasid al-sharia, what does that mean?
the higher objectives of Islamic law. These scholars essentially reverse-engineered the divine texts and deduced that the entire purpose of divine law is to protect 5 foundational human rights.
Oh, wow. What are the 5?
They are the preservation of religion, the preservation of life, the preservation of intellect, the preservation of lineage or family, and the preservation of property.
So the welfare has to be measured against those specific metrics.
Precisely. You can't just say, this is good for the king. You have to prove how it preserves life or property or intellect for the community.
Okay, let's look at a historical hypothetical to see how it works mechanically compared to, say, strict analogy or kias.
Good idea. Let's imagine a new, devastating disease breaks out in a medieval city.
Okay, a plague.
Right. And the only known way to stop it from spreading is to forcibly quarantine a specific neighborhood, effectively shutting down their businesses and restricting their freedom of movement.
Okay.
If a jurist relies strictly on an analogy of property rights and individual freedom found in the explicit texts, they might argue that you cannot imprison innocent people who haven't committed a crime.
Right.
Nor can you unjustly destroy their livelihood. The strict text protects the individual's immediate rights.
Right. The text says you can't lock up an innocent person just because they might get sick.
Exactly. But the Maliki jurist, utilizing maslaha, zooms out to the macro level. They look at the maqazed.
The 5 objectives.
Yes.
Yeah.
The disease threatens the preservation of life for the entire city. So the harm of restricting the movement of one neighborhood is massively outweighed by the overarching public benefit of saving thousands of lives. Therefore, under maslaha, the quarantine becomes not just legally permissible, but legally mandated, because it serves the ultimate objective of the law, even if no specific 7th century text explicitly mentions quarantining that particular disease.
That is brilliant. It gives them this incredible shock absorber for historical change.
A shock absorber is a great way to put it.
They have these deep, unshakable roots in the communal soil of Medina, but they have these incredibly flexible branches through Maslaha that can, bend and sway as the winds of economics, politics, and technology change.
Exactly.
And that exact flexibility is what allowed this tradition to pack its bags and travel, because it didn't just stay in the Arabian Peninsula.
Far from it.
It became the operating system for some of the most complex, vibrant civilizations in human history.
It did. If we trace the geography, it's fascinating. While other schools like the Hanafi spread eastward into Central Asia and the Shafi spread toward Southeast Asia, the Maliki tradition moved decisively west.
Westward expansion.
Yes. It took root in Egypt, and from there it swept across North Africa. We're talking modern-day Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco.
A huge swath of territory.
Massive. And then across the Strait of Gibraltar and became the definitive, dominant legal structure in Al-Andalus Muslim Spain for centuries.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was the dominant school in Spain.
Oh, very much so. And crucially, through the great trans-Saharan trade routes, it moved south and became deeply, permanently embedded in West Africa.
Senegal, Mali, Mauritania.
Yes, Niger, northern Nigeria, all Maliki strongholds.
The scale of this is staggering when you really visualize it. We are talking about the legal framework that governed the Almoravid Empire, the Almohad Empire, the vast Songhai Empire.
Huge, incredibly diverse empires.
Let's put a pin in West Africa for a moment, because the sheer complexity of a place like Timbuktu in the 14th and 15th centuries is mind-blowing.
It really is.
For you listening, if you're not familiar with the history, Timbuktu wasn't just some dusty outpost. It was the intellectual and commercial jewel of the world.
A global metropolis of its time.
You had caravans of salt coming from the north, colliding with caravans of gold from the south. You had massive markets, incredible wealth, scholars importing manuscripts from across the globe.
It was a hub of brilliant minds.
So how does a law born in an 8th century desert town actually govern a booming, cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic trade hub like Timbuktu?
It governs it precisely because of the marriage we just talked about. The marriage of Amal, which provides inherited stability, and Maslaha, which provides adaptable welfare.
Right.
In a place like Timbuktu, you have an explosion of complex commercial transactions. You have merchants dealing in futures contracts, credit arrangements, complex partnerships funding caravans that might take months to cross the Sahara.
High-level finance.
Yes. And the specific details of those contracts obviously weren't occurring in 8th century Medina.
Of course not.
But the Maliki jurists in Timbuktu, sitting in the great mosque colleges like Sankor, they applied the spirit of the law. They used maslaha to regulate these new financial instruments.
Making sure they were fair.
Exactly. Ensuring that they didn't involve usury or extreme exploitation while still allowing the economy to flourish. They regulated the markets, they established weights and measures, they handled complex inheritance cases for wealthy merchants with families spread across different continents.
And what fascinates me is that this wasn't just a legal code imposed by guys with swords. It became the cultural DNA of the region.
It really permeated everyday life.
You read about these massive libraries in West Africa, families passing down these foundational Maliki texts for generations. The law wasn't just in the courts, it was in the living rooms.
True.
But there's a specific cultural nuance here that we absolutely have to dive into because it defines the entire flavor of Islam in North and West Africa.
I think I know where you're going with this.
It's the Sufi connection.
Yes. This is where the genius of the region really shines. To understand the psychological and emotional texture of this tradition, you have to understand the profound historical intertwining of Maliki jurisprudence with Sufi spirituality.
Right. And for you, the listener, Sufism is generally understood as the inward, mystical, or spiritual dimension of Islam.
Exactly.
It's focused on the purification of the heart, the stripping away of the ego, and cultivating a direct experiential love and consciousness of God.
Beautifully put. And in many parts of the Islamic world, historically, there has sometimes been tension between the strict, outward-focused jurists, the scholars of law, and the inward-focused Sufi mystics.
Why the tension?
Well, the jurist is concerned with the outer form. Are your physical postures in prayer correct? Is your contract legally binding?
Okay.
The Sufi is concerned with the inner state. Is your heart actually present with God during that prayer? Are you acting out of greed in that contract? Sometimes those two camps viewed each other with intense suspicion.
Like the lawyers versus the poets?
Exactly.
Like not in this tradition.
Precisely. In the Maliki environments of North and West Africa, in places like Morocco, Mauritania, Senegal, that tension was largely dissolved.
How so?
You didn't have a rigid, unfeeling judge in one building and a free-flowing mystic in another. Very often, the Maliki legal scholar and the Sufi spiritual master were the exact same person.
Oh, wow.
The man who was writing incredibly dense, technical commentaries on inheritance law in the morning was the exact same man leading circles of mystical chanting and spiritual poetry in the evening.
Which completely changes how the law is experienced by the average person.
It changes everything.
Imagine standing before a judge in a contract dispute. If the judge only knows the cold, hard letter of the law, the ruling might be technically accurate, but utterly lacking in humanity.
Very clinical.
Right. But if your judge is also a deeply trained Sufi who has spent decades working on his own humility, his empathy, and his spiritual purification, the entire application of that law changes.
Yes.
It's like having a brilliant Supreme Court justice who is also a deeply empathetic therapist.
That is a phenomenal synthesis. When the strict outer law is administered by someone focused on inner purification, the law loses its punitive rigidity.
It softens.
It does. It becomes infused with what observers call a devotional warmth. The law isn't just a list of do's and don'ts to keep society in line. It is a holistic framework designed to help you become a better, more spiritually sound human being.
Wow.
And you can see how this circles back to the very premise you opened this deep dive with.
Compassion and community?
Exactly. If your legal system is inherently designed to look out for public welfare through maslaha, and your legal authorities are deeply invested in spiritual empathy through Sufism, the natural byproduct is a society that places a massive premium on social harmony, collective responsibility, and community kindness.
It paints a picture of a society that is incredibly stable, deeply rooted, and emotionally warm.
It really does.
But to really appreciate the unique contours of this Maliki Sufi synthesis, we have to contrast it.
Okay.
We have to look at the sibling rivalries within the Islamic world. Like, how does this community-first, public welfare-driven framework compare to the rest of the global Sunni tapestry?
Contrasting the schools really highlights the distinct personality of the Maliki tradition. So, within Sunni Islam, as we noted, there are 4 major surviving schools. We've spent our time on the Maliki school, but let's look at the others.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, you have the Hanafi school. Geographically, they dominate Turkey, the Balkans, Central Asia, and the Indian subcontinent.
Okay.
Historically, they were the preferred school of massive, complex, bureaucratic empires, most notably the Ottoman Empire.
The empire builders.
Yes. Because they originated in Iraq, which was very far away from Medina, they developed a highly sophisticated, deeply systematic reliance on reason and speculative analogy. They are the legal architects. They are incredibly adept at building complex theoretical frameworks for statecraft.
So if the Malikis are relying on the living memory of a specific town,
Right.
the Hanafis are relying on sheer intellectual processing power and systematic deduction to adapt the law.
Broadly speaking, yes. They are very much the logicians of the tradition.
Interesting. Who's next?
Then you have the Shafi school, which is dominant in places like Egypt, East Africa, and heavily in Southeast Asia, like Indonesia and Malaysia.
Okay.
Imam al-Shafi'i actually studied under Imam Maliki.
Oh, really?
He did. But he developed a different methodology. The Shafi'i school is known for its rigorous, systematic legal theory that places a much heavier emphasis on authenticating and applying specific written hadith reports.
Over local customs.
Yes, over local customs or the broad, unwritten Amal of Medina. They wanted a more universally standardized approach to texts.
They wanted the receipts.
Exactly. They wanted everything grounded in a verifiable text.
And then there's the Hanbali school, which feels like the most distinct counterweight.
Yes. The Hanbali school, which is most prominent today in Saudi Arabia, is the most text literalist of the four.
Got it.
They rely intensely on the direct, literal reading of the Quran and the Hadith. They're deeply suspicious of speculative legal reasoning, analogy, or broad concepts like maslaha. Especially maslaha, if those concepts stray even an inch away from the explicit, literal text. Their primary concern is avoiding innovation at all costs by sticking strictly to what is explicitly written.
So when you lay them all out on a spectrum, the Maliki school sits in this incredibly fascinating middle ground.
They really do.
They are much more comfortable using reasoning to achieve societal welfare than the strict literalist Hanbalis. But because their reasoning is anchored to the living, inherited practice of the Medinan community, they are perhaps less theoretically speculative than the Hanafis.
That's a very fair assessment.
They're constantly balancing the written text with the lived reality of a human community. But of course, all four of those schools belong to the Sunni family.
Right.
We also need to navigate the broader, more famous divide in the Islamic world, the distinction between Sunni Islam, which includes our Maliki framework, and Shia Islam.
This is a crucial distinction to clarify, because the mechanics of this divide are frequently misunderstood or overly simplified in Western discourse.
Yeah, we often hear about it purely in political terms.
Right. The fundamental difference between Sunni and Shia Islam does not originate as a debate over jurisprudence or how to read a legal text.
What is it then?
It originates as a profound disagreement over political and spiritual leadership following the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE.
Right. It's a schism over succession.
Exactly.
And this is where the concept of community plays a massive role in shaping theology. The Sunni perspective, which the Maliki school entirely shares, is essentially built on the idea of community consensus.
Yes.
When the Prophet passed away, the Sunni view is that he did not explicitly designate a single, infallible political successor. Therefore, the responsibility fell to the community to choose its leaders.
That's the Sunni position.
And they recognized the first four leaders, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, as the rightly guided caliphs, chosen through varying forms of community consensus and consultation.
Conversely, the Shia perspective is entirely different in its mechanism of authority. The Shia view is that the Prophet did explicitly designate a successor, his cousin and son-in-law, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and subsequently a specific lineage of Ali's descendants.
The family line.
Yes. In Shia theology, these leaders, known as imams, are not merely political administrators chosen by the people. They are divinely appointed and possess an infallible spiritual authority to interpret the faith.
So mechanically, for Sunni Muslims, the religious authority is distributed.
Yes.
It rests in the collective consensus of the scholars who study the texts and the community that practices them. No single living human being holds divine, infallible authority.
Right.
But for Shia Muslims, that authority is centralized in the specific sacred lineage of the imams.
Exactly. And while this begins as a 7th century dispute over political succession, you have to look at how a historical schism like that sociologically mutates over centuries.
Right. It doesn't just stay political.
No. A political disagreement eventually solidifies into theological frameworks, which then trickle down into visible, daily, ritual differences. Because they look to different historical figures for authority, they curate different collections of hadith.
Oh, that makes total sense.
A Sunni jurist might accept a report from a companion of the Prophet whom a Shia jurist entirely rejects due to their political stance against Ali during those early civil wars.
And those different chains of transmission lead to the visible differences we see today.
Right.
For example, Shia Muslims will often combine their daily prayers into 3 time periods, whereas Sunni Muslims, including Malikists, typically pray at 5 distinct times.
Yes.
The Shia call to prayer includes an additional phrase bearing witness to Ali's spiritual authority. But beyond the rituals, what really strikes me is the difference in emotional tone. The way the two communities process history is fundamentally different.
That is a very astute observation. The emotional resonance is distinct. The Shia tradition is deeply shaped by the historical trauma and persecution of the Prophet's family. The defining emotional event is Ashura, the commemoration of the martyrdom of Hussein, the Prophet's grandson, at the Battle of Karbala.
A huge event in the Shia calendar.
Absolutely. It is a profound communal event of mourning, an expression of spiritual devotion to the family of the Prophet, and a powerful narrative of righteous resistance against tyranny. It is deeply cathartic.
Whereas for Sunni Muslims, and particularly in the Maliki tradition we've been exploring, the emotional tone is entirely different.
Very much so.
While Sunnis absolutely revere the Prophet's family and view the events of Karbala as a historical tragedy, they don't ritualize the mourning in the same way.
Right.
The emotional emphasis in the Maliki worldview is not on martyrdom or sacred lineage. It is on stability, unity, and the unbroken preservation of prophetic practice.
Yes.
The emotional comfort comes from feeling connected to an uninterrupted chain of community consensus stretching all the way back to Medina.
But having explored those differences, it is absolutely vital to state the overarching commonality here.
Right, we can't lose the forest for the trees.
Exactly. Despite centuries of political friction and theological debate, Sunnis and Shias share the absolute bedrock of the Islamic faith. They both revere the exact same Quran. They both orient their lives around the Prophet Muhammad. They both practice the core pillars of prayer, fasting, charity, and pilgrimage. And they share the vast majority of ethical and moral imperatives.
Right.
The similarities far, far outweigh the differences.
So zooming back in, you cannot compare Maliki to Shia as if they are apples and apples.
No.
Maliki is just one specific, highly localized lens through which the broader Sunni worldview is applied to the nitty-gritty details of daily life.
Precisely.
And what a lens it is. Think about what we've discussed so far. If you take a society and steep it in this specific Maliki Sufi blend for 1,000 years, a system that values community practice over isolated texts, that uses maslaha to ensure public welfare, and that values inner spiritual humility, it is going to shape the psychological profile of the people it produces.
Undeniably.
So what does a modern Maliki mindset actually look like?
The psychological worldview it cultivates is fascinating, particularly because it runs so contrary to modern sensibilities.
How so?
Well, this is a tradition that produces personalities that deeply value steadiness. They have a profound reverence for inherited wisdom. They prioritize moral seriousness, modesty, and social responsibility over individual expression.
Oh, wow. Over individual expression, that is very countercultural right now.
Completely. In this worldview, the ultimate human crisis is not a lack of novel ideas. It is the failure to live in faithful alignment with divine guidance.
Right.
Therefore, a person raised deeply in this tradition isn't waking up every day terrified that they aren't being innovative enough. Their foundational anxiety is, am I departing from sound guidance? Am I breaking the chain?
Think about the immense psychological comfort in that, though.
It's incredibly grounding.
You are not burdened with the impossible task of reinventing the moral universe from scratch every single morning. You don't have to figure out the ethical complexities of the world entirely on your own.
You're not an island?
Exactly. You are a link in an ancient, unbroken chain. A true follower finds profound meaning and dignity in simply fulfilling their obligations correctly, in preserving justice in their local community, and in actively avoiding the kind of arrogant individualism that assumes you know better than 1,000 years of collective wisdom.
Religion, in this view, is strongest when it is rooted in chains of learning that have been stress-tested by generations of human experience.
It is the ultimate expression of institutional trust.
Yes, it is.
But as you can imagine, that deeply traditional, community-focused, institution-trusting mindset is currently colliding head-on with the reality of the 21st century.
Colliding violently in some cases.
And that collision is generating arguably the most critical tension happening within the tradition today. Let's translate this tension because it is something every single listener, regardless of their background, is experiencing right now.
We're all feeling it.
We live in a global culture that is utterly obsessed with disruption. We worship the new. We're constantly told to hack our lives, to break the mold, to move fast and break things.
The Silicon Valley ethos.
Exactly. We are living in an era of hyper-individualism. And here is an ancient tradition that looks at that frantic, individualized modern mindset and says, no, there is dignity in continuity.
Wisdom is not found in being a maverick. It is found in the communal memory.
Yes, but how does a tradition built on respecting the local scholar and the community consensus survive the internet?
It is struggling to navigate it
Yeah.
precisely because the internet has fundamentally altered the terms of religious authority.
How so?
The phenomenon we are talking about is often referred to by sociologists of religion as dalilization.
Dalilization. What is a dalil?
Dalil is the Arabic word for proof, or
Mm.
specifically explicit textual evidence from the Quran or the Hadith.
Right. So for centuries, if an average person had a question about how to conduct a business transaction or perform a ritual, they went to the local Maliki scholar.
Yes.
The scholar gave them the ruling based on the complex synthesis of amal, maslaha, and established precedent, and the person trusted the scholar.
That was the system.
But now, younger generations are demanding the dalil. They don't want to hear, this is how our community has always done it. They want the scholar to produce the exact sentence from a 7th century text that proves it.
They want the raw data.
Yes. They are increasingly bypassing the complex jurisprudence of the madhab in favor of direct, individual scriptural reasoning.
And this raises an important question, because it represents a massive tectonic shift in how authority operates.
Totally.
For over a millennium, authority meant trusting the consensus of brilliant community scholars who had spent decades mastering not just the primary texts, but the Arabic language, the historical context, the principles of public welfare, and the living tradition.
They were the filter.
Yes.
Yeah.
The scholar mediated the text for the community, protecting the community from literalist misinterpretations. Now, the locus of authority is shifting away from the scholarly consensus and toward the individual text itself.
And the individual layperson's ability to read it in translation on a smartphone.
Exactly. It's DIY religion.
It perfectly mirrors the total breakdown of institutional trust we see in every sector of modern society. We are living in the do-your-own-research era.
We really are.
People don't trust the medical establishment, so they Google their symptoms and diagnose themselves. People don't trust traditional journalists, so they curate their own reality on social media.
And here you have young Muslims who are bypassing 1,000 years of layered, nuanced, community-tested legal scholarship.
They are going online, finding a raw, translated hadith, stripping it of all its historical and legal context, and interpreting it themselves.
And the danger of stripping away that traditional scholarship, particularly the Maliki tools like maslaha, the consideration of public welfare, is that you lose the very flexibility that kept the religion humane and adaptable in the first place.
Oh, that's a huge point.
If you only look at the literal text without the jurisprudential framework, you might arrive at a ruling that is technically accurate to the words on the page, but utterly destructive to the harmony of your family or your society.
Right.
The classical Maliki scholars understood something vital. Laws do not exist in a vacuum. They have to function within a living, breathing community. If you destroy the community to satisfy a literalist reading of a text, you have violated the very purpose of the law.
Which brings us full circle to the paradox we started with.
It does.
We have gone on an immense journey today.
We really have covered a lot of ground.
We started in the bustling, sun-baked streets of 8th century Medina, exploring how the everyday lived habits of a community, the Amal, became the foundation for a global legal school. We unpacked the brilliant mechanism of maslah, public welfare, which allowed this school to adapt to unprecedented challenges.
The shock absorber.
Exactly. We traced its spread across the massive wealthy empires of North and West Africa, where it regulated the markets of Timbuktu and blended beautifully with the devotional warmth of Sufi spirituality.
A beautiful synthesis.
We contrasted its community-centric worldview with its Sunni siblings and the broader Shia tradition. And we've looked at the psychological comfort of its steadiness and how that steadiness is currently fighting for survival in our hyper-individualized, text-obsessed digital age.
It is a remarkable narrative of human ingenuity and faith. And, if we want to extract one final thought from this tradition, something that transcends theology and applies directly to the modern condition we all share.
Leave on us.
We are currently drowning in an era of unprecedented information overload.
Oh, absolutely.
We hold the entire sum of human knowledge, every text ever written on the devices in our pockets, but we constantly make a fatal error. We mistake having access to data for having actual wisdom.
Wow. Yes.
The Maliki tradition, with its intense, unyielding focus on the inherited practice of Medina and the welfare of the community, suggests a profound counter-narrative. It suggests that true wisdom is never found just in reading the rules. True wisdom is found in the lived praxis of a community over time.
It forces you to look up from the text and look at the people around you.
Exactly.
So the question to ask yourself as you navigate your own life, your career, your family, or your community is this. Are you just rigidly following the literal text of the rules, obsessed with being technically correct? Or are you actually paying attention to the living memory, the human context, and the genuine welfare of the community around you?
A powerful question to sit with.
Thank you for taking this immense journey with us today. Keep exploring, keep challenging your own assumptions, and always seek out multiple perspectives. We will catch you on the next deep dive.